Hey Internet, welcome back to part 4 of our Final Fantasy trading card game training series. I'm Mike Byrne, aka Magic Man, and if you've stuck with me this long, you are in the home stretch, my friends. Go ahead and while you're here, click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, all the stuff to feed the algorithm. Today we're going to cover 2 broad topics, and that's going to be abilities and the various ability types in the game, and we'll talk about the stack a little bit more. I know we mentioned that in part 3. If you skipped that one, hit up the playlist so that you can see that conversation. And then we'll move on and just define all the various keywords and mechanics, some of which weren't in the game back when I did this original series 6 years ago. So it'll be an updated list here for 2025. I think that's all to say. Like one more video after this where we'll do a sample game and my son and I will talk through each turn, and probably won't play the entire game since we'll be going a bit long, but it'll give you a basic idea of how things work. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to begin today's discussion talking about abilities because there are multiple ability types in Final Fantasy TCG, in FFTCG. And it's important how you know how each one of these works, how you pay for them, if there's a cost associated, when they're executed, and what ones may start a stack that your opponent is going to get a chance to respond to, and which ones don't. So we're going to kick it off really easily with field abilities. So if we're looking at something like this backup Lulu, that once you've played her to the field, all of your lightning forwards gain 1,000 power. That's considered a field ability. It is altering the state of your playing field. Now, that doesn't start a stack. Playing Lulu does not give your opponent a chance to respond. There is no priority shift here upon playing Lulu. Remember, unlike other TCGs, Final Fantasy does not allow a priority shift by simply playing a character. You can only have priority shifts when there is something on the stack to resolve, or when you are trying to move from phase to phase, when you're going from main phase 1 to attack, to main phase 2, or to your end phase. Simply playing this Lulu does not start a stack, and field abilities aren't going to start a stack either. But it is important to point out here that this 1,000 is always in effect. So the minute I play a lightning forward that is, let's say, 8,000 printed power, it enters the field at 9,000 power. There is no little window there before it gets the buff. Lulu is changing the way your field works, and field abilities generally do that across the board. Things like all forwards now must enter dull. Well, every forward would enter dull then. So there is no window of priority, there is no shift, there is no stack, and these field effects are always in play. There's no window when something enters that you can interact with that doesn't have this field effect in play. Your 8K lightning forward, the second you pay it and play it on the field, pay for it and play it on the field, it's 9,000. Boom. Done. Field effects, easy peasy. Let's move on. Next up, we have auto abilities, and we have talked about some of these in videos 2 and 3 of this series as they interfaced with paying for and playing characters or cards, and how they interfaced with playing characters in main phase 1, and when we started our stack discussion there. These are abilities, and they can come in multiple varieties, but they're abilities that are triggered by an event. You don't pay for these or have any type of cast for these besides playing the character that has them. So if we're looking at something like Olmia here, if we play this backup, when it enters the field is the trigger for this automatic, or what we refer to as auto abilities. Sometimes from other games, and a lot of Final Fantasy TCG players may refer to them as ETBs. And that's a term from other games. It means enter the battlefield. That's an auto ability. So when Olmia enters the field, an ETB, we get to choose a character, freeze it. If we control a category 11 forward, your opponent also has to discard 1 card. Now, Keep in mind, I'm not going to get into more advanced rulings in this series. Again, if you want to see something like that or you have specific ruling questions, feel free to throw them in the comments here. I'm not going to get into the whole discussion here to kind of train you on when things are all one ability, when they were multiple abilities, when they may get canceled or fizzle, and target validation and everything. I'm going to keep it basic here and just say that both summons and abilities that require you to choose targets need to have valid targets to go on the stack, and then those targets still need to be valid when we resolve the ability. Almia does not say choose one character opponent controls, in which case an empty opponent board means you have no target, so this never starts a stack. Almia, if she is the first backup you play, is technically a character. It's one you control, and she's going to enter dull, so freezing her isn't going to be great. But yeah, you would end up freezing your own Almia in this case. And that's a key difference when we're going through all abilities. Make sure you're looking for words like choose up to one character, in which case Almia would not be forced to freeze herself on a totally naked board. Choose one character means you have to have a target, and if your opponent doesn't have any, it's going to be yours. Choose one character your opponent controls limits the choosing to your opponent's board, in which case, if there are no targets, no legal targets, then the ability doesn't go off. So there is a lot of minutia that you will have to learn, but that's down the road. If you're just starting, just pay a little bit of attention. Up to means you can pick 0. Choose one means you have to choose one if there's legal targets, even if they're your own, and they might be a little detrimental to do. It's happened. We've all done it before. There's a number of backups that freeze a character on entry or dull freeze something, and we're like, oh, man, I played it on turn 1, and it's the only target is itself. Great. Fantastic. So be a little careful. But Almia is a perfect example of an enter the field effect. So all that happens is this is played and immediately starts a stack. If I don't want to do anything else on top of that ability, I don't want to trigger another ability, I don't want to cast a summon, my opponent is going to get priority after while Almia is on the stack to do something in response, and only when they pass and I have passed on that priority will Almia then resolve. There are other types of auto abilities like Menad here, that are triggered by different things. I mentioned these could be enter the field effects, or ETFs, or ETBs, auto abilities is how I'll refer to them from here on out. But they could be triggered by some other event. In this case, Menad is actually triggered by you going to your end phase. Remember, I said end phase is a phase that you cannot interact with. You cannot cast summons or trigger abilities during end phase. But there are auto abilities that may be triggered by going into your end of turn phase, and that ability may then trigger additional auto abilities. Those are allowed to happen and resolve. You just can't actually trigger any new action abilities or summons from your hand or from your board when you are in that end phase. It's only auto abilities that are triggered by things going off in the end phase. In this case, Menad, as soon as you go to end phase, a stack starts. As long as your opponent lets you start your end phase, Menad's ability goes on the stack. Now, there is no ability to respond because we're in end phase, so all we're really looking for is here, does Menad's auto ability trigger additional auto abilities? If it does, those are going to resolve first, right? First in, last out on the stack. But assuming Menad's auto ability does not trigger any other auto abilities on the field, we'll choose a monster that went to our break zone this turn, and we'll play it to the field. So we also have on attack triggers, or when you enter your attack phase. So auto abilities can be triggered by multiple occurrences, but they are automatically triggered. There you go. Auto abilities. Next up, we have action abilities, and these are always written in the same format, no matter whether they appear on a monster, a forward, or a backup. They're always written with a cost, a colon, and then the effect. So if you are ever curious, is this an auto ability? Is this a action ability? Is there a colon with a cost on one side and an effect on the other? If so, that's an action ability. You have to pay the cost to do what's after the colon. In this case here, we've got Palom, who actually is an example of a double action ability. There's two different action abilities here. We can dull Palom and discard a card. That's our cost because it's all on the left of the colon. And then we can choose one forward and deal it 3,000 damage. Again, this will start a stack. We'll dull Palom, we'll discard a card, and we will choose a forward. This ability will go on the stack, and assuming there are no responses by my opponent and I don't want to do anything else, that forward, if still a valid target, would then receive 3,000 damage. But Palom has a second action ability too. We can dull Palom and discard one card named Porum, so a very specific discard. And in this case, we would get to choose a forward and deal it 7,000 damage. And yes, if you had a way to activate Palom in between using these abilities, you can use both on the same turn. It's totally fine. Obviously, you'll have to find a way to activate Palom, since both of these will dull Palom as part of cost. But if you can do it, yeah, you're free to. Just remember, Palom can't use these the turn that Palom comes into play, because they both have that dull icon there. Even if you could activate this backup on the turn you played it, you could only dull it to produce CP. You would have to find a way to give it haste to use these particular action abilities. I actually did a little short that you can see on the Ready Check Radio channel about this specific situation, when you have to give something haste to use its action ability on the turn it's played versus when you don't, because there are action abilities that a forward or a backup may have that you don't actually have to give it haste. In this case, the dull icon is there, and that's really what you're looking for. If this just said dull one active Palom and discard one card, it didn't have that dull icon, then if you could activate Palom on the turn you played Palom, you could go ahead and use the action ability. It's that dull icon you're looking for. If it has that icon, it's going to need haste. But there's one key caveat here, and that is monsters. Monsters that have action abilities that include the dull icon can have those action abilities triggered on the turn they're played. So this Flan here, you could play it, dull it, break it, and get your opponent to discard immediately as soon as you played it. So yeah, there's that exception with monsters. Now, monsters that can become forwards still cannot attack the turn they are played unless you give them haste as a forward, but their action abilities, they can be used without haste, even if they have the dull icon. Kind of a little exception you should know about. Sticking with action abilities, this is an example here, Kuja, of one that I was just talking about, where Kuja can be played directly to the field, and we see that we have an action ability at the bottom. We have an auto ability. Anytime Kuja is chosen by an opponent's summon or ability, we're going to get to freeze a forward. But we also have an action ability, cost, effect. In this case, dull active Kuja, choose one forward, dull it. This is a perfect example of a card that we don't need to give haste to use that action ability, because it's not saying dull icon, choose one forward, dull it. It's saying dull an active Kuja. That is not something we need haste for. So we could literally play Kuja and immediately dull Kuja to dull a forward if we needed to. So just be aware of the difference. That little dull icon is really the one that you need to look for. I did want to point out another type is still an action ability, but this is one with a different cost on top of dulling. So Vivi has an auto ability that when it enters the field, choose a forward, dull it. That's great. We play a backup, we get to dull forward. But then Vivi also has an action ability here for one lightning CP and one uncolored CP, and dulling Vivi and putting Vivi in the break zone to choose a damaged forward, break it. So we're going to lose a backup off of our field in this case. But we also have to dull this Vivi and pay one lightning CP and one uncolor CP. In this case, I just wanted to point out that you can dull two backups, let's say a lightning backup and a water backup, and then dull Vivi and put Vivi into the break zone to generate that one lightning, one uncolored, in this case, in this example, water. We dulled Vivi, and then we broke him. You can't dull Vivi for that lightning CP, right? Because dulling Vivi is part of the cost by itself. So we're going to have to get that lightning CP from somewhere else. However, we can also just discard a lightning card for 2 lightning CP, and that would also satisfy our 1 lightning, 1 uncolored CP requirement here. Really, the best way to read this in your head is I need 2 CP and at least one of them has to be lightning. That's the best way to read this. 1 lightning and 1 uncolored. I need 2 CP, one of which has to be lightning. Discarding a lightning card for 2 lightning CP absolutely meets that requirement. So you are able to stack your payments accordingly. And the rules on discarding 1 card per element needed will still apply here. If this was lightning and water and you had no other backups besides VV, you could discard a lightning card, discard a water card. You've generated 1 extra CP of each color, but you still got your 1 lightning, 1 water for VV's ability. So absolutely optional. Absolutely options that you can do. Excuse me. I will also point out here that, and this is a common question in like all ruling forums for newer players, anytime an action ability or a summon or anything like that references selecting a backup and removing it from game as part of payment, as part of the cost for an ability, you can't sacrifice your opponents. Like if you have a forward that it says, when it enters the field, choose 1 backup, remove it from the game. If you do so, break 2 forwards, whatever. That backup that you remove from game, it will usually say in those types of instances, 1 backup you control. But in action abilities, it's not as wordy as it is in ETBs. So often it would say, 1 lightning, 1 dull, put a backup in the break zone. That has to be your backup. When it comes to costs, it's your characters that are going to be sacrificed as part of costs. You can't sacrifice your opponent's characters and then also, break characters with the abilities. And then finally, on the abilities front, we have field, we have auto, we have action, and we have special abilities. And this is something we really haven't touched on at all yet. So it'll be the first time you've heard of these in this video series. Anytime you see a character, forward, backup, whatever, that has that orange ability, that orange text at the bottom. In this case, Wool has blurred strikes. That's just the name of the ability. And ironically, if you're a Final Fantasy fan, by the way, always kind of look at the abilities, particularly specials and their names and what they do. They're often very thematic when you think about, oh, that's how that would in fact impact the field. Oh, that's kind of like what that character did in this game. It's often very thematic, and I appreciate those nice touches for fans of the Final Fantasy franchise. Anyway, this is a special, so it has its name in orange, and it has an S icon next to it. All that S means, and it's the same across all specials, is that to trigger this ability, our cost is going to be 1 Earth CP. We can see that Earth CP icon, and 1 S. Well, what does S mean? It means we have to discard a card from our hand that is the same card name as the card in play. So in this case, I have to discard a card name Wool, W-O-L. Nothing else, no Warrior of Light spelled out. That's a different card name. It has to be named Wool. Now, it does not have to be this particular Wool, 25-056L, by the ID number in the bottom of the card. It could be a Wool from another Opus set. Maybe I'm running multiple copies of different Wools simply to make sure I can get this special as many times as I can in a game. You can certainly do that. Look at a lot of card name clouds. Even the Limit Break cloud has a special. So you could run other clouds in your regular deck to trigger the Limit Break cloud special. So in this case, payment here would be 1 card name Wool discarded from my hand and 1 Earth CP. It follows the same format as action abilities in that there is a cost, a colon, and then an effect. But the payment is a little bit different. That S indicates I need to discard a card name Wool. If this was card name Cloud, I would need to discard a card name Cloud for that S. And then any other payment works exactly like action abilities. In this case, 1 Earth CP, whether that's from dulling 1 Earth backup or discarding an Earth card, doesn't matter. And then I would get to put this on the stack, and assuming there's no responses, we would go ahead and reveal the top 3 cards, add 2 other than card name Wools among them to my hand, and put the rest into the break zone. So that's it. You've got it now with actions. We've got our field abilities. We've got our auto abilities. We've got our action abilities, and we've got our special abilities. And now you know how to use them and how to pay. All of these abilities, with the exception of field and auto, all action and special abilities can be used on your opponent's turn. They are all instant speed, just like summons, unless the ability specifically says that it's limited to a particular turn or limited to a particular number of times per turn. Final Fantasy TCG does have a difference in the way they spell this out. It will say once per turn, and that means you could use it on your turn and then again on your opponent's turn, or once per turn only during your turn, in which case I can do it on my turn once, then I can't do it anymore. I can't do it at all on my opponent's turn, but when it comes back to me, I will have the ability to use that action or special one more time. So do pay attention. There are cards that limit when and how many times you can use it. Maybe there's abilities that are limited to being done in a particular phase. So always use the card text to determine if there's any special modifiers to when you can use those abilities. But generally, they are instant speed, just like your summons. And that means it's time to finish up with some keywords. Now, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. We've talked about some of them, and a lot of them are going to be a bit intuitive for those of you that have played other TCGs. I will also have in the description below a link to the Final Fantasy TCG webpage, specifically the keywords page. Some of these, like break and dull and activate, that you'll see on that page, I'm not going to talk about anymore here. We've covered them in previous videos, but I do want to hit you with all of the keywords and the key mechanics so that now you know how to add those into your Final Fantasy TCG play when you see them come up in new cards that you're buying. Some of these aren't really in starter sets yet, but they will be. For instance, there's no limit break in starter sets. Someone asked on a previous video, and I gave you an answer on that one. But we do have a number of sets coming up this year that will include limit break. So keep an eye when you're pulling those booster packs and you're ripping them open. These are some of the keywords you might see, and here's how they all work. Okay, so first up, we're going to go with search. Search is a pretty easy one. It's pretty intuitive, right? I play a card named Claris. It says that when Claris enters the field, I may search for one job king and add it to your hand. We've already pointed out that the job is in the middle of the text bar across the middle of the card, so Claris himself is a chief minister, but search allows us to pick up our shuffled deck, fan through it to find a card, in this case, Job King. It's not specific on forward, backup, monster named with Job King, so we can get anything. And we're going to look for a card that's Job King. And we're going to set it face up on the table so that our opponent can seize what we searched for. This is to ensure that it was a valid target, right? A little unfair if I could just take it to my hand and not have to show it to you. After I have searched for the card, my deck is shuffled, and then I give it to my opponent to cut it, and then it goes back in its draw pile spot. The king that I have searched comes to my hand. That is how all searches are resolved. Pick it up, find it, show it to your opponent, shuffle, offer your opponent the cut, put it back for a draw pile. That's search. That's it. You can fail to find in a search. You can fail to find. Maybe you did it on purpose, right? You just wanted to pick up the deck, see what was left in there for a game that's getting close to maybe decking out. You weren't quite familiar with what was maybe still left in the deck, and you wanted to take a peek, knowing that, hey, I don't think I have any Job Kings left. Maybe when you look through your deck, you do have a Job King, but it's not beneficial for some reason for you to take it to your hand right now. Maybe you know your opponent has some ability that's going to rip it out of your hand, and it's too important. You'd rather try to draw into it. You can fail to find, shuffle that, look through your deck, shuffle it up again, offer your opponent the cut. Look is very different, by the way. If you see a card that says look at the top three, you do not have to, and take one to your hand, you don't have to show your opponent what you took. Search, you do. They get a chance to see that it's valid. Next up, we have the keyword haste. And in this case, let's show you 8, who inherently has haste. Notice the keyword right at the top of the text box. But I'm also going to show you somebody like Zach, who has conditional haste. If I control 3 or more Category 7 forwards, Zach gains haste. Playing Zach would give me 1 Category 7 forward. He does count himself here. It will specifically spell out if he did not count himself. It would say 3 or more Category 7 forwards other than card name Zach. In this case, if I had Zach and Cloud and Aerith out, Zach would have haste. So it's conditional, but has the ability to get haste. Haste just means 2 things. On the turn you play it, it can attack if it's a forward, or if you want it to attack. You don't have to, but you can. And if it has an action ability that includes the dulling icon, where normally you would have to wait until your subsequent turn, then you don't have to. It has haste, so you can dull it. And remember, when I talk about having to wait on those action abilities until your next turn, a forward or a backup or whatever cannot use that dull icon action ability until it has been through one of your active phases. So I may complete my turn with a forward that has a dull icon action ability and pass to you. I still cannot use that dull icon action ability unless I give this forward haste on your turn. When it comes back to me and this forward and backup has survived an activate phase on my side of the board, now that dull icon ability is online and doesn't require haste. So just a little clarification there on haste. Future editing Mike here. As I was going through and editing this video, I realized I forgot to talk about freeze at all. It's kind of a smaller keyword, but it's one that we should definitely cover in the interests of this entire glossary video with the links in the description to each keyword and mechanic. Freeze simply means that the character will not activate during your next active phase. Now, generally speaking, unless the choose requirement specifies differently on a card, you can certainly apply a freeze to an active forward or an active backup or an active monster. But this is generally most effective when you freeze something that's already dull. So freezing an opponent's backup on your turn, if that backup was dull, means that backup will not activate during your opponent's next active step, and therefore it'll be one less backup they have available for resources, or if it has some type of ability that requires it being dull, it won't be active to use that. So you'll have a little bit of a benefit there. You can certainly apply that freeze to something that is active. Maybe later in your turn, you intend to dull it some other way, and now it will be dull and frozen. So a target, unless the choose of your ability requires the target to be dull, you can certainly apply freezes to active characters and maybe dull them later, or maybe you don't have the ability to dull them, but you were required to choose something, so you applied a freeze. Simply means during the next active phase for that character's owner, it won't get up. So yeah, now back to past, Mike. Next up is Brave. We've got Barrett here, big boy Brave, and he's got a ton of auto abilities, one when he enters the field, one at the beginning of attack phase. All we care about right now is that Brave keyword, and this one's super, super easy. Brave just means that when Barrett attacks, he doesn't have to dull himself. That's it. Magic the Gathering players, this would be Vigilance, right? You just kind of shake the card. Hey, I'm attacking with Barrett. Give him a little shake. You don't have to dull him, which means, right, you get to attack with Barrett, but then Barrett is still active to potentially be a blocker on your opponent's turn. So pretty cool. Brave. Vincent here gives us the example of First Strike. We kind of went through a First Strike example when we talked about combat in the last video, but just in the interest of completion, I do want to include it here. First Strike means that when this forward is blocked by another forward in combat and we get to the damage resolution step, Vincent will deal his damage first. In all other cases, without First Strike, the two forwards deal their power in damage to the other forward simultaneously. In this case, with First Strike, Vincent gets to hit them with 5,000 power, assuming he does not have his buff. He probably would, right? Because he's been in combat here. We swung with him, so he becomes 9,000. But Vincent, whatever his power is during the damage resolution step, would deal his damage first. and would only take damage in return if the blocking forward or the attacking forward that Vincent is blocking survived that first strike attack from Vincent. Gives him a little bit of an edge in combat. And keep in mind, forwards and backups can have one or more of these keywords. We have forwards that have Haste, First Strike, and Brave. So you can have more than one of these keywords. Next up, let's hit Miwa here, a popular card in the current meta in a number of different decks. We're going to use Miwa as the example for back attack. Back attack is really neat, and there's not a lot of cards with this keyword because it is very, very strong. You can only play forwards, backups, and monsters in your main 1 and your main 2, right? Unless they have back attack. Back attack allows these characters to be played at instant speed, the same as your summons and your action abilities. So theoretically, you could swing with all of your forwards during your attack phase and deal 3 points of damage, and now your 3 forwards are dull, and you have an open board that your opponent could just attack right into without having to worry about being blocked. But you could bait them, right? So they could swing a forward at you, and in response, you back attack, pay 2 water, pay 2 CP, one of which is water, back attack Miwa into the board, and then Miwa's auto ability activates all the forwards who could now block to their heart's content. So yeah, back attack, very, very strong. There's a number of great characters, particularly forwards with this particular keyword. It just means that the forward can be played at instant speed. So just like summons or action abilities or special abilities, that's your turn or your opponent's turn anytime you have the priority to make a play. Neat keyword. Now we kind of start segueing into more mechanics. And so Morse is going to be an example here, a very easy one of our damage mechanics. So you can see Morse is brave. There is an auto ability there. We are interested in that damage 3, damage 5 text at the bottom of the box here, where at damage 3, Morse gains 1,000 power, and at damage 5, Morse gains 1,000 power. So it's the same effect, but it's in 2 different stages. This one's really easy. It just means if you, as the player, have taken 3 or more damage and you play Morse, he will gain that additional 1,000 power for being at least damage 3. So 3, 4, 5, 6, doesn't matter. You're going to get that damage 3 ability. This also does take effect if Morse is already on the field, right? If you are at damage 2 and somebody swings with a 9,000 power forward, well, Morse is only 8,000 power. Maybe you don't want to block that. You opt to take the damage, putting you from damage 2 to damage 3. All of a sudden, Morse on field has become a 9,000 power forward. You immediately get it as soon as you meet the qualifier. It doesn't have to, you don't have to wait to play this. At damage 5 and 6, at least 5 is what we're looking for, Morse is going to get another 1,000 power. So if you are at damage 5 or 6 and you have Morse on the field, this bad boy's a 10,000 power forward. 8,000 with 2 1K buffs because you are at least damage 3 and at least damage 5 if you're sitting at 5 or 6 damage. Obviously, 7 damage doesn't matter because your face is dead. Then we have Warp, one of the newer mechanics in the game. Excuse me. Warp is always indicated at the very top of the text box there with a warp, then a number, and then a cost. If you had Sephiroth in your hand, you could pay 7 CP, one of which has to be lightning, to play Sephiroth. And when Sephiroth enters the field, you would get to choose a forward other than him and break it. And then he has his special if you have other card named Sephiroths in your hand. And that's the only cost in this particular special. Just discard a Sephiroth. No doll icon, so you could use it the turn it came into play if you had a bunch of Sephiroths in your hand and you needed to break some stuff. And that's all well and good. Warp 3 with a lightning CP has no impact to us being able to do that. However, 7's a bit pricey for an 8K forward that really only breaks one forward and has the potential to break other forwards with a special. So we could warp Sephiroth instead. What that means is we can pay the cost next to the warp icon. In this case, it says warp 3 for 1 lightning. We can pay that 1 lightning CP and warp Sephiroth. We'll put him outside of our play space in a public zone, so he's kind of like RFG, right? He's removed from game, but both players can see him. And we'll put a die on him that says 3, because Sephiroth is warp 3. Somebody might be warp 1, warp 4. However many that number says, we'll put a die on Sephiroth that says 3. Now we've got a unique situation here. Sephiroth is not on the field. He doesn't get his enter the field effect. We didn't put him on the field. We warped him. I'll pass to my opponent, and when they're done, they will pass back to me. When I go into my main phase 1, so I activate, I draw, right at the beginning of my main phase 1, an auto ability goes onto the stack to change Sephiroth's counter by 1, to take it from 3 to 2. Assuming my opponent does not want to respond, yes, this does create a stack, so there is an ability to respond. My warp counter that was at 3 for Sephiroth will go to 2. Each subsequent main phase 1 of my turn, I will do this same ability, taking him from 2 counters to 1. When I get that last main phase 1, where I take him from 1 counter to none, an auto ability goes on the stack for me to remove the counter. My opponent may let that resolve, and a new auto ability immediately goes on the stack since Sephiroth is out of warp counters. That auto ability is to play Sephiroth to my field. Assuming no responses, because this does start a stack too, Sephiroth will then come into my field. So think of it as a delay. I got Sephiroth for 1 CP, but I had to wait 3 turns to do it. Warp isn't always going to be cheaper. Sometimes it's more expensive because you might get an effect for actually warping the character. So it may make this one, who's an 8K7, very, very expensive, make him very, very cheap if you're willing to wait 3 turns. A 3 cost forward might cost you 4 to warp because it gets a chance to break something if you warp it, and then will come into the field later. So yeah, it's a nice way of kind of keeping things out of play, but just be aware that it immediately does give your opponent a priority window at the very beginning of your main phase 1. Something that they don't normally have until you've done something that starts a potential stack or priority shift. So that's warp. Very interesting mechanic. Next up, we're going to talk about counters. Cisne is a pretty easy example, and one you might see in some current meta games, particularly if somebody's running an Ice Lightning Turks deck. Yes, that's a thing if you are a fan of the Turks. When Cisne enters the field, we're going to place 1 Shuriken counter on Cisne, and then that's an auto ability. And then Cisne has an action ability for dulling Cisne and removing a Shuriken counter from any character you control. So that could include the counter that's on Cisne. Choose 1 character, dull it, and freeze it. Usually these are just marked by dice, right? How many counters does a particular character have on them? You just set a die on that character showing the number. So we would play Cisne and maybe drop a die on her that shows 1. Most counters have a very specific name. There's a difference between a counter on Cisne and a counter on, say, a different character. Cisne's is called a Shuriken counter. Another character's might be called a Doom counter, for example. So the names differ, and that doesn't hold a lot in the current meta right now, but there are a couple of cards that will reference specific counter names. For instance, Cisne's Shuriken counter, there are other cards in Final Fantasy that have the ability to gain or pass out Shuriken counters. And since Cisne can remove them from any character, that's an interesting combination. Doesn't always work out that way, but pay attention to the counter names. There really isn't any way for you to interact with the specific counters. There's a few cards that maybe allow you to add counters to cards that already have counters, but it's not a core gameplay mechanic. You're unlikely to see a lot of it at any given time, but it is important that you be aware, hey, Cisne is sitting there with a die on her that says 1. That means that action ability is in play, and I have to be aware of that when I'm thinking about my turns. Next up, let's talk about crystals. You Magic the Gathering players, it's been a while. I believe this was called Power A similar mechanic was called power. You can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. Notice that when Sarah enters the field, we gain, and it's showing a little crystal icon. This is a resource that's specific to the player, not to Sarah Mobius itself. So when I get a crystal, Sarah Mobius isn't getting a crystal. Mike is getting a crystal. And usually, again, this is something that we might put down a crystal card or multiple crystal cards on the side of our playmat just to show you how many we have. Some people put one crystal card down, and then if they get more than that, they'll just put a die on top of it to show how many of those crystals they have. This is a resource for the player, so if Sarah all of a sudden got nuked and left the field, I don't lose that crystal. It's a resource of mine. And then there are action abilities, like Sarah Mobius here. You can see that to pay one crystal, and then until the end of the turn, she gains 1,000 power, and if she's dealt damage, reduce it. That have crystals as a cost. So it's a pay and spend mechanic, generally used for action abilities like you see on Sarah here. But there are some cards that do give you the ability to, hey, if you don't want to pay 4 CP for this forward, there's an alternate cost for 1 CP and a crystal. So it can be used in other places. The most commonly used area is pay and spend via action abilities like Sarah Mobius. No real meaningful way as of the recording of this video to interact with your opponent's crystals besides forcing them into situations where they have to spend them. There's no summons or auto abilities that can take crystals away from your opponents. Again, as of the recording of this video. And then finally, we're going to get into priming, which is the newest mechanic added to Final Fantasy TCG. And I mentioned earlier that I will link the keywords page in the description below. I am also going to link a specific new player document from Square Enix on priming. So I'm not going to cover like extreme detail here, but we will go through the core of the mechanic. So Clive here, you can pay 4 CP, one of which has to be fire, and you can play him, and you can just call it a day, right? And in that case, the job icon forwards and job dominant forwards, other than Clive you control, are going to get a 1,000 power buff. When Clive deals damage to your opponent, you can discard your entire hand and then draw 2 cards. Kind of a neat way to get rid of cards that you don't really care about and draw 2 new ones. Or if you happen to drop Clive on an empty hand, it's basically just draw 2. And he does have haste, so a bit of a threat the minute that he comes in. Notice that he doesn't have any autos here on entry, so playing Clive you can't respond to. You know, you just, okay, there's a Clive on the field. Great. But you do have the additional option of priming specifically into Ifrit XVI. That is a card name when you see it in quotes there. Priming into Ifrit XVI. And the cost for that is 1 fire and 1 colorless CP. So just like our previous action ability example, you could dull a fire backup and then dull any other backup. You could discard a fire card and meet the qualifications for both of these. That's 2 CP, one of which was fire. Either way you want to do it. When you prime, you pay that cost. You pick up your deck. You search. This is a search. So you are going to end up revealing what you search for, but it can also be responded to as a search if there was an auto ability on the stack. I'm going to talk about very specific timing windows for priming because you can't respond to somebody actually priming, right? I can't cancel a search after my opponent has paid the cost to prime. Priming does not start a stack. I don't have the priority to cancel a search. I would have had to do that before they paid for priming. But Clive himself didn't open up a priority window either. So you have to be cognizant of your windows when you think somebody's going to be running dominance and icons in their deck. Priming does not start a stack. It is, however, limited to their main 1 and main 2. They can't prime on your turn. They can't prime in combat. You can only prime when it's legal for you to actually play a character. So there's a little bit of a limitation on your opponent on when they can do it, and there's a limitation on you on how you can actually respond to it. But for the sake of triggering auto abilities, it is important to remember that priming is considered a search as well. maybe that's applicable if you have, a forward out that says when your opponent searches for a card, draw a card. Well, that's an auto ability. Yes, you are going to get to draw that card. We're going to pick up our deck. We're going to search through it, and we're going to find any card named Ifrit XVI. Has to be that specific name. Ifrit doesn't cut it. Ifrit XVI. Boom, got it. We're going to take that card, and we're going to set it on top of our Clive. Clive has primed into Ifrit 16. The only thing that Ifrit keeps from Clive at this point is the card name Clive. And that's important. We'll get to why in just a moment. But this whole, when you deal damage, discard your hand, draw two, the buff to other... no, that's gone. That text is gone from Clive, from Ifrit. All we are basically Ifrit, and all the text you see on Ifrit, and we're also card name Clive. So this is card name Clive and Ifrit 16. But we now use the power and the text box associated with Ifrit at this point. I can have both a Clive on field and an Ifrit 16 on field if I paid for them individually. I cannot now, however, if I play Clive and prime into Ifrit, I cannot play a Clive or another Ifrit 16 because I have technically a card named Clive and a card named Ifrit 16 on field already. So yes, you can play them individually of each other, play Clive, opt not to prime, and then play Ifrit. But if I have primed Clive into Ifrit, I'm now blocked from playing Clive or playing in Ifrit 16. However, the plus side of them having the same name is now that Spit Flare special that Ifrit has, which just costs 1S, no doll, nothing, no CP, nothing, just 1S. I can discard card name Ifrit 16s or card name Clives. So if you've got a couple of those in your hand, you've got a lot of damage you could start passing out. So there is a benefit. If I have just nakedly played Ifrit, I did not prime into Ifrit, then I can only discard Ifrit 16s for that special. When I prime from Clive into Ifrit, now I have the ability to discard either Clive or Ifrit 16 for that special. So kind of neat there, but you do have the limitation of if you prime into it, you can't play either card name until this one leaves the field. There's also one last piece of priming that I do want to go over here, and again, I would encourage you to read over the documents to get the full nitty-gritty. I'm taking you through the high-level version of it here. When you have a dominant primed into an icon, so I have a Clive primed into Ifrit 16 on field, if that forward, which is only one forward, if that forward is broken or returned to my hand or removed from game, there's a special series of events that actually has to happen here. Remember when we did limit breaks and we said, oh, a limit break forward, if it breaks, it goes to the break zone, but then it's immediately taken out of the break zone and put into your face-up limit break pile. So it does go to the zone it's supposed to, in case it would trigger any auto abilities because it went there, but then it goes to its own special zone. That kind of happens here too. If Clive is primed into Ifrit 16 and let's say is just broken, my opponent casts a forward to break a summon to break a forward, and they chose my Ifrit 16 that had been primed into it. Both Clive and Ifrit 16 cards go to my break zone, but then Ifrit 16 is taken out of the break zone and removed from game. I don't get to keep recycling that Ifrit 16. Clive stays in my break zone, but Ifrit is removed from game after hitting my break zone. And that's the same regardless of where they're sent. If Clive Ifrit 16 is returned to its owner's hand, both cards would come to my hand, and then Ifrit would leave my hand and be removed from game. I'd get to keep the Clive, but the Ifrit is gone. Now, if I play a naked Clive or a naked Ifrit and they go to the break zone, they just stay there. This is only when they're in that primed condition do you actually have to get rid of the icon after the cards go back to whatever zone the actions are sending them to. Break zone, your hand. If they both get RFG, then, removed from game, then fine. They both just get removed from game. But if they go anywhere else, you don't get to keep that icon. It goes there, but then it's immediately removed from game. And that's it. That's it. We did it. Woo! We did it. We have gone through field abilities, auto abilities, action abilities, special abilities, every keyword in the game. You have the explanation of all the phases, how to set up the game, how to pay for things, how to do it all. You are good, my friend. You should be playing. I mean, you should have been playing after the last video and then maybe just looking up a couple of these things while you waited for me to make this damn video. But you are all set. You should be playing. The next video, which I will try to get to this weekend if I can get my son to have some recording time with me, will just be an example game where we'll take 2 decks and we'll very slowly and deliberately talk about activation and drawing and paying and abilities and stacks and all that stuff. But you're ready to play, my friend. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you'll stick with me. Make sure to check out some of the shorts. I just started putting the first one up yesterday, but you should see more of those as we go along as well, just like quick little hits on Final Fantasy TCG stuff. And if you like what you see, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks so much. Stay safe. We'll see you on the servers.